All right, so to practice, what we are going to do is focus. Here we go. Is just do a few with inequality notation and matching it with interval notation, and then looking at some number lines and converting that to interval notation, and then we're going to wrap up by solving some equations or some inequalities. So what I have is x is less than -2. So it may help as you're getting used to this to draw you a little picture, because it kind of sort of unfolds on the picture. So if s is smaller than, that means we're going to go left. And then can it equal -2? No, it can't. So we would use a soft bracket or a parenthesis. And now where does your answer begin? Your answer begins somewhere out in -infinity, which always gets a soft bracket or a parenthesis. And it's going to come all the way up to -2, but it's not going to touch it. So it's going to get just short of it, like infinitely short, but not touch. So what about if I have something like -3 is less than x is less than or equal to 2? So this case, first of all, read it from left to right. Is -3 smaller than 2? Yes, it is. Okay, so is -3 smaller than x, which is smaller than 2? That means x is between -3 and 2. So he'll get a soft bracket because -3 cannot equal. And he'll get a hard bracket because +2 can equal. And then x is going to be everything in between. So we go from -3 to 2 and then close it off with a hard bracket. So what happens if we have something like 2 is less than or equal to x? Okay, well, we've kind of brainwashed you into always putting the x's on the left. But this is okay. We can read this. This says that 2 is smaller than x. 2 is smaller than x. 2 can also equal x. So it may help to flip the entire equation. So I'm going to write the x first. I'm going to flip the inequality. So that's going to go greater than or equal to. And then I'm going to put the 2 on the other side. So make sure you flip this inequality if you're going to flip-flop the order of your variable and constant. So what I have, make sure it makes sense. 2 is smaller than my answer. That must mean my answer is bigger than 2. Okay, so putting that on a little number line, we have an answer of 2. And then x is bigger than that. And then since it's got the horizontal bar, which means or equal to, I'm going to make that bracket hug the answer. And now read it from left to right. My answer begins at 2 and goes to +infinity. Okay, so let's try some other examples. We have, write this inequality in interval notation. So I'm going to start at -8. And I'm going to go all the way over to 2. So this is my number line. Okay, and what I would like for you to do is convert that into interval notation. So reading from left to right, where does my answer begin? It begins at -8. It cannot equal -8, so it gets a parenthesis or a soft bracket. I've got all of these answers all the way till I get to 2, and 2 is going to be able to be equal to, and so he's going to get a hard bracket. Okay, what if I have something like, here's a 6, and here's a soft bracket, and then I'm going to have all of this, and I'm going to make sure that that little arrow is included. So where does my answer begin? Okay, my answer begins somewhere in -infinity, which always gets a soft bracket. And I come all the way up and I hit 6. And in this case, 6 also gets a soft bracket. Okay, so I'm looking for some interesting ones. So let's write this inequality in interval notation. So I have 9 is greater than x, which is greater than or equal to -3. All right, so first of all, you should notice that 9 is bigger than -3. Okay, so that's your first clue that we got some flipping to do. The next thing is that 9 is bigger than x. 9 is bigger than my answer. Okay, my answer is bigger than 3. So I'm going to flip everything. So I'm going to start by writing the -3. I'm going to flip this inequality to be a less than or equal to. X is in the middle, so he stays in the middle. Instead of this being a greater than, he's going to be a less than, and then I'm going to write my 9. Okay, so I can flip everything. And now negative 3 is smaller than my answer. My answer is smaller than 9. So negative 3 must be between negative 3, oops, sorry, negative piece of trash. Negative 3 must be between, I'm sorry, I cannot write and do that at the same time. My answer is between negative 3 and 9. It can equal negative 3. It cannot equal 9. Okay, let's do another one. So I've got negative 2 is less than x is less than 2. And so I am going to write this in interval notation. So where does my answer begin? First of all, negative 2 is smaller than 2. So now make sure your signs match up too. Negative 2 is smaller than my answer. My answer is smaller than 2. So looking at that on a number line, I would go from negative 2 to positive 2, and my answer is in between. So if I write this, I have a soft bracket at 2 and another soft bracket at negative 2. So now look at this magic right here. If I were to cover all of that up, and if I were just to write this on a piece of paper, you wouldn't know if that's interval notation that actually means an infinite number of answers, because remember there's an infinite number of numbers between negative 2 and 2, or if that's an xy coordinate. That could be the point, which it's not, but it could be the point negative 2, 2. And so we will always be very, very clear with our context, because this is not a coordinate on an xy plane. So context is important. We will let you know this answer should be in interval notation. Okay, so just in case you were like, hey, that looks kind of sort of like a point, it looks exactly like a point, but it is not a point. Okay, it's interval notation, and it represents an infinite number of solutions between negative 2 and 2. All right, so let's wrap this thing up, and we are going to solve some equations. So I have a negative 9, x plus 3 is less than or equal to 48. And one of the things that you need to be extremely aware of is if your variable, well, just look at your variable. If your variable has a negative coefficient, you are going to need to flip your inequality at the end. Flip your inequality at the end. So if my coefficient is negative, I'm going to end up flipping my inequality, and I'll show you why in a second. But for right now, this is our little line of battle, and we're still going to approach everything the way we always have. I'm still going to get x by itself. So in this case, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. That gives me a negative 9x is less than or equal to 45. Okay, at this point, this negative right here, we're fixing to divide by a negative. And if we multiply or divide by a negative with inequalities, we need to flip that inequality. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and divide by negative 9, divide by negative 9. So now I've got x, and now this is going to flip, and he's going to be a greater than or equal to negative 5. So on a number line, there's my negative 5. X is bigger than that, and I'm going to have a hard bracket. So in interval notation, my answer starts at negative 5 and goes to positive infinity. Now, look what happens. Because negative 5 is kind of like the barrier between answers I can use or cannot use, so can't use these ones, can use these ones. Let's get a nice friendly number and slap it in our original problem and see if it still works. So do you agree that 0 is an answer that's supposed to work? It's in that shaded area. So let's try it. Negative 9 times 0 is 0 plus 3. Is that less than or equal to 48? Yeah. 3 is less than or equal to 48. So when you divide by that negative, or if you have to multiply by a negative, if your coefficient is negative, you better flip that inequality at the end. But that's going to be the one little change that we make. All right, so let's try another. Let's try another one. We have x minus 6. So x minus 6 is less than or equal to 7x plus 6. Okay, so I'm still going to use my same strategy. And I'm going to move my smaller x's. Okay, so I've got x plus or minus a number, x plus or minus a number. So I'm already in the correct format. So now I'm going to move my smaller x's. So I have a negative 6 is less than or equal to 6x's plus 6. Okay, subtract 6, watch your signs. So negative 12 is less than or equal to 6x. And then I'm going to divide by 6. So I get a negative 2 is smaller than or equal to my answer. So remember, at this point, I can flip-flop everything. So instead of being negative 2 is smaller than, I can say x is greater than or equal to negative 2. If you also notice that little opening right there is facing the x, so keep the little opening facing the x. Okay? So this now says x is greater than or equal to negative 2. So I've got a negative 2 to positive infinity. And again, let's check our answer. Negative 2 is the barrier between the things I can't use and the things I can. So 0 is in the numbers I can use. So let's plug a 0 in here. That means I've got a 0 minus 6 is less than 0 plus 6. Well, is negative 6 smaller than positive 6? Yes, it is. All right, so this is your answer in interval notation. Let's do a couple more. So I've got a 2 times an x plus 6 plus a 2 is greater than or equal to a 6 plus a 3x. So what's something I know how to do, because this is my boundary. So I do know how to distribute. So I've got a 2x plus 12 plus 2 is greater than or equal to, and just because I brainwashed you into putting the x's first, I'm going to go ahead and put the x's first. So now I've got a 2x plus 14. Okay, and I am going to combine my x's by moving the smaller set. And I'm going to subtract 6. So I get 8 is greater than or equal to x. My x is on the wrong side, so flippy floppy. X is now less than or equal to 8. So on a number line, you would have an 8. And then x is less than that, so I'm going to say that way, but it can also equal 8. So where does my answer begin? Negative infinity all the way to 8 with a hard bracket. All right, let's do one more. And that one more is going to look like this one. Is less than or equal to 7x plus 5. Okay, so we got to start off by multiplying by a negative. So if we're going to multiply by a negative, we got to flip-flop that inequality. So any multiplication or division by negatives, we've got to flip-flop. So I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 2. So it's going to reduce over here. So I've got a 5x plus 3. Flip-flop this because you multiplied or divided by a negative. And now I'm going to distribute this. So that gives me a negative 14x minus 10. And now it's in a nice pretty format. Okay, we're fixing to go back in and check it one last time. But I'm going to move my smaller x's by changing the sign. So I've got 19x's plus 3 is greater than or equal to negative 10. So I'm going to subtract 3. So 19x's is greater than or equal to negative 13. Now divide, and you're dividing by a positive. Do not flip. And I get negative 13/19. So according to this, that's a number between 0 and negative 1. Okay, my answer is going to be bigger than that. So again, 0 is a nice pretty number in my interval that's supposed to work. So that gives me a 5 times a 0 plus 3 over negative 2 is supposed to be less than or equal to a 7 times 0 plus 5. So that gives me negative 3/2 is less than or equal to 5. So that works. Okay, so I flipped my inequality appropriately. So my final answer is going to be negative 13/19 all the way to positive infinity. And that is it for this section.